Do you think that we're in a recession? I bet you're not the only one asking that question. You're all asking that question. It kind of feels like we're in one, but the economy says that we are not in a recession. Literally, recessions are part of a natural economy cycle, but identifying if we're in one is not that straightforward. That is why we can't really say if we're in a recession. There's some things or factors that will help us determine if we're actually in a recession. To make things worse, the market volatility, the increased interest rate, the tariff, the federal government cuts. Anyone can argue, even experts are arguing that either we're in a recession or we're about going into one. If that happens, what does that mean for multifamily? Like I always say, and I'll keep reminding us, as long as I keep talking about the market, that I'm not a politician. At least at this point, I have no business with politics. But as a multifamily investor, I always want you, my lovely ones, to know exactly what the market is saying and how you can get prepared. And this will help you, whether you're a passive or an active investor, to help you determine the right step or the right thing for you to do. So now let's dive into it. What actually is a recession? A recession typically can be defined as 2 consecutive quarters of a negative GDP growth, accompanied by rising unemployment, reduced consumer spending, and declining business activities. However, the National Bureau of Economic and Research, NBER, uses a broader range of indicators to ascertain if there's actually a recession. And what are they? Employment rate, consumer confidence, industrial production, retail sales. Looking at everything I've mentioned, so do you think we're in one? Why the US economy has not officially declared a recession? There are several indicators that point towards a slowdown. And what are those indicators? Number one is the GDP growth. In the Q1, the first quarter of 2024, the US GDP grew by 1.8%. And in Q2, it grew by 2.1% in Q2, showing sluggish but positive growth. But in Q3 2024, it contracted by minus 0.4%, sparking recession concerns. Another indicator is the inflation. The US inflation peaked in June 2022 to about 9.1%, but remained elevated at 4.2% even up to early 2025. Still well above the federal government 2% target. That is, the federal government were looking at reducing inflation rate to about 2%. And currently, as at early 2025, it was still at 4.5%, which is way above exactly where the Fed wants it to be at. The third indicator is the interest rate. The Fed's aggressive rate pushed the federal funds rate to about 5.5%, the highest in over 20 years, driving up borrowing in real estate investment. The third one is unemployment. Although still relatively low at a 4.1% unemployment rate, unemployment is creeping forward, signaling potential labor market crisis. And that is not even considering this recent federal government cut that might even spark things more. The last one is the real estate cap rate. The multifamily has not also been void of all the issues that are happening. In short, it has really affected the market cap rate. In 2021, the cap rate of properties were about 4.5% as of 2021, but right now in 2025 we are looking at 5.7%, which is making properties lose value. Before we go into how this will affect you as an investor, let's dive into some historical perspective. Throughout history, recession has significantly impacted the real estate investment. In the 2008 global crisis, home prices fell about 27% nationwide. Multifamily was also affected, but it rebounded faster than offices and retail because of the high demand of rental housing. Although apartment vacancies rate spiked to about 8%, but recovered within 2 years. That was in 2008. So now in 2020, which was the COVID-19 recession, GDP dropped to about 31.4% in Q2 of 2020. You should not be surprised at that because the nation was shut down. Multifamily occupancy remained stable with about 9.4% average occupancy throughout 2020 as people favored renting rather than buying during economy uncertainties. Rent growth slowed but remained very positive, particularly in the suburban market. What we are seeing now for interest rate, we are seeing 9%, 8%, 7%, 10%. So if you think you've seen high interest rate, let's go down to the history on the 1980s recession, where interest rate peaked to about 18%. severely impacting home sales. Imagine if you were buying properties in 1980s at an 18% interest rate. I'm sure many people were not buying homes, rather people were going into renters, because at 18% interest rate, how do you intend to cash flow? So looking at where we are right now in terms of the rates that we have compared to the 1980s, I would say that we are still far from rate hikes that people have experienced in periods like that. Even at that, multifamily property with fixed rates fared better as demand for rental housing increased way more than buying. Just like I said, you would not want to buy a property at an 18% interest rate. You would rather wait it out by renting, and when the interest rate drops, you will now consider buying. So these are some of the historical perspectives that we have on when the US have gone through recessions. I would not say any of them was good, but if you look at it, it kind of favored multifamily investing more than every other type of investment, because of the demand for renters. Multifamily is more about demand and supply. Economy stability, recession, inflation favors multifamily investment. So now I'm going to break down how recession can have an effect in your multifamily investment. One of it, like I earlier mentioned, is increase in rental demand. During recession, home ownership tends to decline due to rising mortgage rates and tighter lending criteria. This drives people to renting than buying, and we can see this happen in the 2008 recession. Even with everything that was happening, people decided that it was better for them to rent than for them to own. So recession in 2008 had an impact on home ownership versus renter. So it favored more demand for rental apartments than ownership of properties. The number two is slower rent growth. Yes, we can see that the demand for multifamily remains high, that people in recession period will want to rent rather than buy, but that does not take away the fact that rent growth can be stiff or even zero. Yes, people will still rent, but you cannot increase your rent like the way you would have wanted to do it, because one, there's low purchasing power. So we can see the effect on rent growth becoming flat or even negative. I'll give an example of how that happened. In the 2020 COVID recession, rent growth fell from 3.7% annually to about 1.8%. But multifamily assets still generated positive cash flow. What does that look like in 2025? Rent growth projections have slowed from 6.2% in 2023 to 3.1% in 2025, according to CBRE. So this is why when I tell people, if you're an acquisition specialist or you are buying multifamily, you need to be very conservative. Those days of having your rent projections to be 5%, 10%, 7%, 15%, at least for now, is over. You need to be very conservative in underwriting and just assume that the market is going to be flat or no growth. You have to have that projection, because with the sense of recession, we might not see any growth in rent. Yes, there will be high demand for rent, but it does not translate to growth. That's just the issue. The next impact on your multifamily interest, which I've always said, is higher interest rate and financing costs. Rising interest rate during recession increases the debt servicing of any deal, making it harder to refinance and acquire new properties. So many people are locked in on their investment. They cannot refinance because one, the property has either lost value or the cost of doing it has gone extremely high. So refinancing right now is on record low, and also acquiring properties. There's a lot of inventory out there, but there's a lot of supply, but the demand for it has significantly declined because one, the interest rate has gone up and is affecting the ability for people to buy those properties. So let me put this into the right perspective. A 10 million loan at a 4.5% interest rate will require you to pay about $450K annually. But right now, the same 10 million property, but at an interest rate of 7.2%, you'll be required to pay $720,000. You can see the margin. That's a lot of money that is going. And we're seeing this happen. Properties that we bought back then for 4% interest rate, right now we're buying them for 6.8% interest rate. There's a large margin. So it will also make the deal very difficult for you to come by, to make deals difficult for you to cash flow or even pencil out. I can tell you for a fact that for us to get one deal, we have to write more than 100 deals. A lot of this for us to get just a single one. And most of them, it's not that the deals are not good, it's just because the interest rate is killing those deals at this point. The next one is the property valuation might rise. And we are seeing that happen because they're seeing cap rates significantly increase periods that there's a sense of recession or when there's a recession, whereby pushing value of properties down. Cap rate is a very important factor in assessing the value of a property. So at any time there's a recession, the cap rate tends to go up, and the higher a cap rate goes, the lower the value of the property becomes. That is where the problem is as well. Although there's a good side to it, for people that are buying property, it just gives them better opportunities for them to buy better assets, and because the cap rates are higher and all that. But in a case whereby you're selling, it's a different conversation. The value of your property would have reduced. Like the property that we're currently under contract on, 2 years ago, they wanted to sell that property for 60 million. They actually got it under contract for 60 million. But right now we're buying that property for about 11.9 million. You can see the significant difference between that time and now. And that's just mainly because of cap rate deflation. The value of properties have gone lower because of the cap rate. Cap rates have gone high. And that is part of the effect of what recession can do in an economy. Recession can bring about operational pressures and delinquencies. So when tenants are losing their jobs or there's no money in circulation and all that, what does that lead to? It will lead to tenants not being able to pay their rent. I can tell you for a fact that delinquencies has increased on our properties. I can tell you for a fact that people are losing their jobs, and these are real life issues. These are part of the reasons how recession can affect the multifamily investment. To just put a little more statistics on this, multifamily delinquency increased from 1.3% in 2022 to about 2.5% in 2024, according to real page data. And these are real data, these are significant data. And we know delinquencies can actually reduce cash flow. So the higher it becomes, the lesser a property can perform. So it's bringing about a lot of operational issues for property owners at this point. One of the ways we've been able to mitigate this is by tightening our tenant screening. So we have increased the bar for how we put in tenants in our properties to mitigate the risk of having this type of issues of high delinquencies. These are mitigation strategies. It doesn't overrule the entire losses, because it's possible that you screened a tenant where tenant had good job, had everything going well, but let's say down the line he lost his job and things start taking a downturn on him. Before you know it, start to have effect. He doesn't pay his rent and all that. But these are very, very good strategies, ways to mitigate, not to totally eradicate it, by increasing your tenant screening criteria. So what are the strategies as a multifamily investors that you can use to mitigate this kind of issues? Like I always say, there are always factors that can affect your multifamily investment, which are the macroeconomic factors. These are things that you literally do not have control over, but you need to look for ways and strategies for you to mitigate the effect on your investment. I always mention this: no investment is void of risk, but you're trying to look for the investment that has not so much of a risk than others, because there are some investments that have more risk than some other investments. So multifamily, from time and time again, has shown to have a fair share of a risk, but at the same time, there are ways that it can be mitigated or handled. That's why we see so many people investing in multifamily compared to other forms of assets. Now let's dive into what are the strategies that you can use to kind of mitigate this recession risk on your multifamily investment. One, I will not stop saying it, focus on cash flowing assets. For those of you that are investing on assets that are not cash flowing, or assets that do not have the tendencies to cash flow, you know them. I don't want to mention them. I don't want to step on anybody's toe, but let me just see them a little. All those your 401ks, your IRAs, even the stock market. You need to start rethinking your strategy. You need to start investing in cash flowing assets like multifamily, things that can cash flow, has the ability to cash flow, things that is not dependent on appreciation. So for the stock market, we both know that a lot of it depends on appreciation, but it's like a guess. We're guessing or projecting that this would happen, and if this happens, I'm going to get this. Multifamily does not work like that. Most times performance, how you're able to perform the property, that will determine the kind of cash flow you have, and that is if you bought the property well. So first of all, you must actually have bought the property well, then start performing it well. Then you can now start seeing consistent cash flow. These are very important factors. Don't just invest in things that do not have a consistent cash flowing benefit. So invest in multifamily. The next one is try and fix your rate. This is not the time. I'll say it over and over again. There's a time to play with bridge loan or variable loan. This is not the time, because the economy is very volatile. Interest rate is spiking up. Nobody really has a right sense of what interest rate is going to be in the next year. So this is a period for you to go back to your drawing board and start fixing your rate. Don't use variable rate at this point in time. That is why we are seeing construction loans going down, because construction loans most times are variable rates, and all that's having an impact on that. But if you're not into construction, I would advise that you fix your rate. It's important that that happens now than later. I've been saying this for the last 3 years, how operation has become the most critical tool for any multifamily investment. Yes, you can as well fix your interest rate. You can as well think of investing in consistent cash flow. But if you don't have the operational capability, this entire thing that we're thinking of is over. We don't need to have a conversation. Operations is very, very critical. From 2021 to 2022, we saw that even if you did not do anything to a property, properties will just naturally appreciate. We saw people buying properties today and like selling it in 1 month's time without even doing anything on it. Neither did they paint the property, did they change any fittings, they didn't do any form of renovation on it, but they were ending up getting sometimes 2x of their investment. That was what the market did at that time. But this time is a different ball game. This is not the time for you to slack or slow down on your operations. Right now is the time for you to put on your thinking hat and start operating your properties very well. You need to start getting the right property management companies. You need to start having the right asset management team that can be on top of things and ensure that your business plan is being executed. So this is the time for you to start doing that. The next one is for you to maintain strong liquidity. Right now, what we are doing is we're increasing our liquidity level on our properties because we need to have some wiggle rooms for when things goes up, like if vacancies increases, you need to have contingency reserves that you can go in and pull out cash from to mitigate the risk of defaulting in your mortgage payment and all that. So this is a time for you to increase your liquidity on those properties. If you were doing, let me say 2%, it might be a time for you to increase it to 3%. Whatever that might be for you, this is a time for you to increase your liquidity. The next one, this is my sweet spot, underwrite conservatively. That's why most deals I don't jump into. I've seen people bringing deals to me, but I end up not doing them. And it's not because I don't want to do them. It's because the underwriting is not conservative. The underwriting is not sometimes realistic. So I just take a step backwards and I say no. And there's nothing wrong with you saying no if your underwriting is not what you want it to be. Maybe it was very aggressive or not at the level I would have expected it to be, or maybe some omissions of projections. I always like to ask questions like, what if things can go wrong? Things may not seem the way it is. Like we've seen things from the outside. Before you buy a property, you can have a different perception about some items. Then when you now start operating it, it becomes a different perspective. If you have done a conservative underwriting, you will have some wiggle room to adjust. But if you did not do that, you are very aggressive, then you are in for trouble. So you just want to try and avoid that by having or making sure that your underwriting is very, very conservative. In summary, why recession can bring short-term challenges such as lower rent growth, rising cap rates, and tighter financing. It also creates long-term opportunities. So it's not all that a doomsday that you want to literally and translate or say that recession is. It's not doomsday. It also creates long-term opportunities. Only for those that can see it. Multifamily remain resilient due to the high demand of housing. Even during economy downtime, it doesn't change. There's always going to be an housing demand. Whether the economy is doing well or is not doing well, there's a recession, there's an inflation. Right now, there's always going to be that opportunity for people to always demand for housing. For investors with strategic foresight, strong liquidity, and a focus on operational efficiency, recession will present a chance for you to acquire undervalued properties and optimize its performance and build long-term wealth. I cannot just say any other thing by saying that multifamily is just that investment. This is the time for you to start buying. The opportunity is now opened for you to start making the right choice. Start investing in multifamily. Thank you and have a wonderful day.